Good afternoon and welcome to the January 11th meeting of the Litchfield School Board's Facilities Improvement Committee. I'll call the meeting to order and we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I just wanted to start with a note that we had invited state representatives Ralph Baum, Rich LaSalle, Lakis, and also Senator Susie to attend our meeting to discuss school building aid. So that's part of the agenda moving ahead. Hi, Jen. Hi. Currently, we don't have anyone in attendance, but Senator Susie did say that she would try to make the meeting, I believe.
Yep, we got a reply from Senator Susie, and we also got a reply from both Representatives Lakis that there was a committee meeting in Concord that they were tied up with, so they would not be able to make it today.
Okay. All right, so I'll turn it over to you, Mike, with the information about the GMS land purchase.
Yep. So a couple of things on the GMS land purchase, and Kyle is here with us, but I've opened up some documents that I'll share up on the screen. So Kyle, I'm currently projecting the wetlands boundary reconnaissance map that was conducted by Novus. So one of the things that the board had authorized us to proceed ahead with was conducting what's called a fatal flaw report on the property, so that we could go into the voters in March and into the deliberative session and be able to talk about what we know about the property. We get a little bit more information than what we can just see with the naked eye. So what you're looking at here is the map of the land that Novus has gone out and walked, and they've marked off the wetland delineation on the property. So we knew that there was a wetland area that bisected the property, and it basically created, it's almost like thirds of the property. There's the third that runs along Albuquerque, which is all the way to the right of your screen. Then there's a third in the middle, which is the wetlands portion that we knew was out there. We could just tell by the soil types when we walked across it. And then there's the back third of the property that seemed drier, but you'll also notice there's some pretty steep ravines on that back third. So at some point, who knows if it was melting of glaciers and the water just rushed down through there, because those ravines that you see marked in orange are heavy lines of elevation changes, and we did take note of that when we were back there. But remember, this is a 35 plus or minus acre parcel of land. To build the school, the state's looking for us to have 10 acres, and Kyle feels that we can build on less than 10. He'll comment on this, I'm sure, but basically we felt pretty good in looking at this map that there was a buildable portion right along Albuquerque that would allow us to site the school. And you'll notice one thing that was a little bit of a surprise to us is the finger of wetland that sort of cuts across. I'll show it with my cursor here, but this finger that comes over, that's one that we didn't anticipate, because what we end up with is this dry upland area that is a little bit cut off from the rest of the property. But you'll see in a second when we take the plans that we've been working with that we can actually figure out how to utilize all of this. So Kyle, do you want to give any other commentary on the map of the wetlands, or what you thought when you saw this come back from Novus?
Sure. A couple of things. First of all, just to sort of set the scene, that it's almost impossible to find a 30-acre property without wetlands. Just there's not that much of it left around here, and that even a 10-acre property without any wetlands whatsoever is pretty much unheard of. So the fact that we might have to mitigate some of the wetlands is not surprising at all, and in fact, it doesn't seem all that bad compared to other projects that I've worked on. With that, the wetlands themselves, there's different types of wetlands. There are the vernal pools, which you really can't touch. But then there's, your average everyday wetland, which can be mitigated, but there are certain things that go along with that. And then there's the drainage ditches, which are wetlands. They're technically wetlands, but they're not high quality that the vernal pools or the wet meadows and things like that propose. So when we're looking at this layout, that finger of wetland that kind of cuts diagonally across, I think that's a drainage swale coming from across Albuquerque. When we walked it, we saw a couple of places, and I think there's another one closer up towards the fire station where there's a culvert that goes across, and there's a little bit of a wetland, but it's just a drainage ditch. So the quality of the wetlands makes a difference, and again, setting the scene that this is not more significant of a wetland than I've seen on other projects. The other thing too is that when Novus laid out the wetlands, they just picked out the boundaries, but inside those boundaries could be pockets of upland that are usable. And so I'm thinking that that large kind of isolated wetland or upland area, we can bridge across the wetlands and mitigate to make it part of the whole. But also there could be some usable spots in that area of wetland. Maybe not for buildings, but for a play field, for other recreation. There's certainly opportunities there, even though it's showing as wet. We can't just discount the whole area.
Kyle, that's really good kind of grounding of this because, the school district doesn't buy land every time we turn around. You're in the business. You are more apt to look at land and understand what's out there. So I appreciate that perspective. The other thing that I want to just note is that, there's this kind of narrow choke point, even among that narrow finger of wetlands, that it's almost like it comes together. So even accessing across that is, it's something that's pretty easy to do because you're not talking a big area there. One other thing before leaving this map is I want to, and I wish I could fly out another 5,000 feet, but I can't. So keep in mind that this is a large tract of land to the south as you continue down Albuquerque that has not been developed, and that these are the back lots of the properties along Westview. So this is, if you pulled in the Westview from Albuquerque, these would be the houses on the left-hand side. And what's interesting to note is that the homes themselves were all built on sort of the front third of the property, and they have deep backyards in comparison. And so most of them are relatively wooded along the back of their property as it approaches the subject property line. So I just think that that's something to take note of as you look at this, because you'll see that that'll be a question for some people in the community when we get to siting a school on there.
So I don't know if you have the dimensions on it. Do you know what the frontage is on Albuquerque?
Kyle, do you remember the frontage? I want to say it's 700 plus or minus.
That's what I remember.
And considering the fact that you have like the first third is dry, how far in from Albuquerque is the thought of putting the school?
Yeah, you'll see that in the next map. We're gonna actually place it right on there.
All right.
Are we good with this overview? Let's go to the next map then, because the next link in the agenda is this. So a couple of things to orient to it, and then Kyle, I'm going to have you chime in also, but you can see the school building itself, which is sort of that angel-shaped building that we've seen before. Remember, that was conceptually designed for another piece of property, which is oriented pretty much the same way. So it was really a matter of just lifting it up and bringing it over here. And you'll also notice that there are elevation grades in that part of the property that allow the configuration from the other property to work pretty nicely here. So the right-hand end of the building is the one-story end of the building, and then the gymnasium and the left-hand end of the building is the two-story end of the building. So it really will fit into the grade, because the grade from Albuquerque slopes down in a way. So it'll allow that structure to be built into the earth contours, if you would. And so what Kyle is proposing is that the entrance to the school be further down away from the fire station. So picture the fire station is in, probably this flat area here is where the fire station would be. And you would continue down Albuquerque, and then you would enter into the school here. And you can see that he's got the car loading loop in the front of the school with parking for visitors and then parking for staff set back a little bit further. And then there's a bus loop that would go in behind the school and continue around. And so students who were loading onto the buses would do so in this general vicinity of the building. So this accomplishes a key goal of separating bus traffic from car traffic in the way that people will access in and out of there. And the other piece is that you can see Kyle's taking advantage of the play field, or of that upland area, by putting the play field here, and that is a regulation soccer field, to give you perspective on how much land that ends up being. So, so Kyle, I did the general overview and pointing, but I'm going to ask you to go a little deeper into it or give more commentary about some of your thoughts with it.
Sure. I want to start with the main driveway entrance. There's a very good reason why I moved it down to the furthest end of the property away from the fire station. There's a couple things about that. One is that it's less conflicting with the fire station. If there's something going on there, we're not right in front of it. And second of all, the grades are a little bit more flat down in that area. So I think the views in and out of the site would be better, safer at that location of the property. Another thing about it, though, and I've been thinking about this, that location allows a longer driveway getting up to the school building, so that way we can have more cars queuing on site, as opposed to what happens now at the current Griffin, where the cars, there's very little room to queue, so therefore they end up queuing up on the street.
Can I ask a question about that? So my question is, why wouldn't you not send the cars around the back of the building and put the buses in the loop, similar to what we do at LMS, where that's even more real estate to have, on the rainy days when you have, I think of our situation, and on a rainy or a snowy or a cold morning, oh goodness, we have cars that go all the way around the school and out down McElwain. Why would you not take that more real estate of knowing that parent pickup and car pickup has been a challenge? Why would you not use that? Flip that.
That's a great question. What I probably need to do is actually figure out how many cars can queue in this configuration. The reason why I have the cars in the front is for safety, basically. That's the front entrance of the building, and so I don't want to send cars behind the building, because that's not where the front entrance is. There's less security, less visual connection with the main office, and also where the playgrounds and stuff like that's going to be is going to be in the back of the building. So I really don't want the public accessing that. I want that back loop road to be only buses, fire trucks, or service vehicles. So what we can do, though, is I can calculate what the queuing is for this loop in the front, and maybe what we can do is extend it by using more of the parking lot areas and making it not straight in order to create some more queuing. So if that's a concern, but let me find out what the actual load that we can handle this first. Does that make sense?
Yep, we're getting nods.
Okay. All right. So along with that, though, Michael, when I showed you this the other day, you had a good comment. Do we need a second means of egress off the site for cars? And so I've been thinking that at the end of the school building in the upper right corner of the property, we probably would find a spot where a driveway could go on to Albuquerque, somewhat close to the fire station. Again, that would only be emergency access, either ingress or egress. And or we could possibly use that for the buses. So instead of the buses following the same car queuing loop, we could have them coming in the back directly.
I was going to say, actually, if we don't create some sort of separate bus entrance, we gain nothing, because the buses are just going to get plugged up with the car queue, and they can't get by the cars to then access. So if they have their own entrance, then they can get kind of, and then you'd almost be able to, if I'm imagining this correctly, so there could be no confusion, you could almost get rid of the pavement on the right side of the building. So then you can almost have that top lane just go straight off the property, and so then there's just that entrance. So it's not a full complete loop around the building. So then the car load would just go into a loop, no option to turn right and get to the other side of the building.
No, I think those are great comments. The thing is that the fire department likes to see a loop all the way around the building. You know, if they're fighting a fire, they're not going to want to have to get to the end of the loop and say, oh, geez, we got to go all the way back around again. So, you know, keeping it in a loop, I think, is a good thing. But there would be a do not enter sign at the end of the visitors parking lot into that loop, so that it's only utility vehicles.
Well, you could line up that road to go right to their.
Yeah, I mean, it literally could be.
Literally right out of the garage door and just straight shot right across.
Yeah.
That's better than looping around the building.
That is very true. It's very true.
And honestly,
So those-
Kyle, we've done that at Campbell because they built the separate bus entrance area. And when the gate failed, and it was, I don't know, Dave, $20,000 to repair the gate or something.
Replacement. Yep.
Yeah, to replace the gate. We said, why can't we just sign it buses only? And for the most part, I'm not going to say a car doesn't sneak in here or there, but, you know,
Or out.
it's
Yeah.
it's worked out pretty well. So anyway, we'll find a way to make all of that come together. But great
Well,
comments.
keep in mind that this is just simply what's called a test fit.
Yeah.
You know, it's a test design to see if the things that we need will fit in the space.
Huh?
I did this in like 3 hours, so you know, spending real time on this, it's going to even be a better design. Not bad for 3 hours, but you know,
It's not bad for 3 hours, Kyle. You did well.
And so anyway, so we've got the car loop, we've got the bus loop. We know where the service vehicles are going. The buses would actually queue up at the end of the gym, so you'll see where it says bus loading. And the reason for that is that, first of all, that's where the playground is, and also where the cafeteria is. And so oftentimes in a school, the cafeteria is used as sort of a buffering zone. You know, kids line up per bus, waiting to go out to get into the bus in the cafeteria. And or on a nice day, they might be in the playground or on dismissal. The kids, you know, I've seen schools where the kids don't leave right away and they want to go play on the playground for a bit, and then the parents wait for them and then they leave. So having the playground, the bus loop, the cafeteria, all that working together in the plan, I think is very helpful for administration.
Now, remind me correctly, if they came off the bus, they would enter into that kind of hallway entrance to the gym, and then like third and fourth grade would then have to go upstairs, correct? Because that would be
Yes.
the lowest level of the building.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly. So that's a good point. That a couple of things about the visibility of the building. Now, I located the building at the northern end of the property to be in line with the fire station as a visual cue, so that when you're entering into that center of town, it really starts to feel like the center of town, because the buildings are more clustered together around where like the gazebo is, and that becomes the center of town. So the visible aspect of that is important. But that the end of the building that's closest to Albuquerque is only 1 story tall. As Mike pointed out, as we go to the left, as we go to the west of the property, the grade slopes down and the building becomes 2 stories. And where the gym is a full 2 stories in height as well. And so what you see from the road is actually a much smaller building than what you see from the inside of the property. And then there was a question about buffering to the next street, you know, the houses that back up to it. And a thought I had about that is there is enough room to pull the building away a little bit to create a woodland buffer along there. But keep in mind that all the traffic is on the southern side of the building. And so those neighbors would never be bothered by, you know, the car traffic, headlights, noise from the kids, because all that activity is on the southern side of the building, the opposite side from where those houses are. So I think there's a built-in sort of buffering that goes along with that. The other thing, too, is that the distance, even though the building is not that far away from Albuquerque, again, all the activity is further in, and so we don't really have kids that are in the playground close to the highway like we have in current Griffin. They're at the opposite end of the building, and that even the cars where they're picking up and dropping off is a little. There's a bit of a buffer. It doesn't look like that much on the plan, but when you start to actually lay it out in the field, it ends up being a pretty big space between the front entrance and Albuquerque. Plus, we do want to have some connections for kids that might walk. There is a sidewalk on Albuquerque, and there's a couple of places that we would probably try to connect with that so that kids could walk to school safely. And also to make that connection between the school and the town center where the fire station, police station, and town hall is. As far as the play field, as Mike said, that's a regulation soccer field. It could be smaller and impact less wetlands. Again, I'm not concerned about the wetlands so much that in a minor impact, we can mitigate 3,000 square feet of wetlands without really much problem. If we get up into larger quantities, then we have to look at mitigation where we create wetlands somewhere else on the site in order to destroy wetlands where we need to do the construction. So I think there's a lot of opportunities on the site that we could swap some wetland areas in other parts of the site and gain space around the building. And you can see that even as it is, there's a little bit of room on the west end of the building and on the west end of the parking. If we needed to expand or we needed more parking, there's the possibility of fitting that in as it is right now. Mike, did I hit everything that we're...
Kyle, I think you did. The one thing, I want to make sure playground siting, because we clarified in the meeting that the playground is not on the play field. So the play field is a dedicated field for soccer or whatever gets set up out there. But where do you envision the playground structures? Inside the bus loop road, or would it be outside of that bus loop road? And if so, where? I think we had them to the west of the building.
Yeah. Do you remember a rendering that Ashley McGraw did of the playground next to the gymnasium?
Yeah,
Yeah, it was sort of in this triangle, right?
Yes, exactly. So that's where I'm picturing the playground. But that doesn't necessarily mean the kids would have to stay there. I'm kind of a fan of natural playgrounds, and so I think it's possible that we could have some play structures or some areas where the kids could play further to the west.
Over in this area.
And be in a more natural area. Now, that means crossing this bus loop, but again, if we're not allowing cars on the backside of the building, I think it would be safe to be able to allow the kids to walk across the bus loop to get to a play area. And in fact, we're going to want some hardscape spaces for the playground, basketball court, that kind of stuff. And where I've done that before is where you have the bus loading to make that extra wide and put basketball hoops on it, because the buses are only there for 20 minutes a day. So the kids could be playing on that during the day, and then the buses come and queue up, and it seems to work out pretty well in other places I've done that.
Make some outdoor learning spaces out, like I'm envisioning them out on the other side of that bus loop.
Yeah, I look at it, and if I'm hearing what Kyle said, you have some structures in this triangle, so they're a little bit protected. This bus loading area can have, basketball hoops and other structures, because you're not going to have buses coming through there during recess time. And this area over here can be more of that naturalized playground or
Exactly.
play structures, so I really like the way it sort of integrates in. Plus you've got some, you get into some grades here, so you have some ability to construct into the hillside and so forth.
Yep.
It's really kind of interesting.
Well, there would probably be a separate playground for the kindergarten and preschool, and that would be on the east wing, probably towards the middle of the classroom wings, near where the library is. And we talked about maybe even trying to work something in for an outdoor space from the library. One of the things came out of our working on the educational specs was there's a desire to really connect the indoor spaces with outdoor spaces. So I'm seeing that there could be quite a few zones where the kids might be going outside, mostly staying within that loop to make it safe. But on the west end, if we could utilize some of the woods area for play space, I think that would be very cool, and maybe even for educational space.
And Kyle, am I correct? Sort of the rectangular area, sort of the head of the angel, if you would, is like an outdoor terrace. Is that how that ended up being? Do you remember, Dan?
There was a walkout from the library, so yeah, I don't know if terror, but yeah, it was some sort of
Exactly.
outdoor learning space.
Outdoor learning space incorporated right in there, so.
Exactly.
Could
Got
easily
it.
have the playground.
So that's not shown on the plan here, but we'll try to fit that in.
So just get a little ahead. So it's gonna be a full-size soccer field,
Yes.
right? Will it be a baseball field within that soccer field?
So that question was asked, and it was not being designed as such, but if the community were to, really push back and say, hey, could this be a soccer, baseball, kitty corner?
Yeah, the reason I'm asking it, preferably not, because you don't want to playing soccer on a baseball field is terrible.
Okay,
But my thought was, will the middle school be going to this field?
well, that's the probably $250,000 question, which is, if we can get a field constructed at the middle school, so that the middle school is able to play there in the front
But
yard.
the reason I'm asking, if not, then where would be the closest bathrooms? I mean, that's the thing that generally anytime we travel to another soccer field, there's a bathroom accessible, generally like right on the outside of the building or not far within the building. These kids get off the bus after like 45 minutes and the first thing they're doing is 20 girls running to the bathroom.
Good call. And, the porta potties only go so far, so,
I mean, a lot of buildings have outside facilities, the door is right there on the outside.
Just like Campbell. You
Yeah.
know, that would avoid the
Right.
fees for the outhouses.
But I don't remember specifically, but I think the basis for kind of that part coming south is the gym, the cafeteria. So
Yep.
all of that would be able to be closed off from the rest of the school, and there are facilities in there.
Yes, so the gym, there was that, if you see that little sliver to the left of the gym, that's meant to be like an entryway that could be locked off from the school so that,
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that that's one of the problems that our teams have run into in not having a home and going to other places is, they're going to Dara, they're going to Griffin, they're going to any place, and it's, do we have a porta potty there? And if they're coming from school and it's been a 10-minute bus ride or a 15-minute bus ride, or they're walking through the woods, or however they're getting to another place, they're going to need to use those facilities. And I'd prefer not to put them in a porta potty if we could help it, to have that option for a location that is sanitary and clean.
And that's gonna be a full-size gym,
the intent is for that to be a full-size gym.
so I can see the middle school going there also to play.
Yep, that's possible. So Kyle, I think that's good feedback as, now that we're seeing the fields, because before it was just the outline of the building, but when you start to attach it to the fields, access to facilities from the outside would be something we want to think about in that gym area potentially.
Absolutely. Kind of talking about toilet facilities, one thing to point out is that the septic field would probably be under the play field. I've done that at several schools. It seems to work out relatively well. Just pointing it out because it shows that there really is enough room on this site for all the things that we need. Because septic system can end up being a real problem if it can't fit.
We have that at the middle school, but I don't know that we've, nurtured the play field component of the field in the same
Yeah,
way.
it's too
So
small.
I think to, incorporate that in from the get-go to say, hey, this is where it is, and make sure that we're able to fit everything in makes perfect sense, so.
Yeah, the access to the field and it's not as clear at the middle school. They have to brush beat to get through to the field. They're working on it, but
And Brian said it's not large enough.
it's not a legal anything field.
Oh, okay.
And
The
it's,
width and length.
They play
Just a flat
play
plane amongst
kickball
the
out there.
fields.
They can use it for gym classes, for
yeah.
random games, but it's not
the
large enough
perfect
to
capture the flag field, that's about it.
use. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've watched rocket launches and others, so I mean, at least you don't have trees overhead, but it's
Yeah.
not a play field.
Yep.
You also don't necessarily know it's there,
No, it's weird, the way it's.
the way the tree line
separated
is and
off.
stuff like that.
And I think I just want to speak to Brian, to your point about shipping our kids to this building. I would rather see if, again, at some point, I know that it's down the line because we're under construction now and I'm good to not be under construction for
A while.
a long time after we're done with this phase. But I think having places that are at home for LMS to have home games that are home and not have to go someplace else to be home
Yep.
would be really important for that community spirit
But I know
in
we've
that
talked
building.
about it as far as like putting a field at LMS.
Well, I think the other big question is the disposition of GMS. So, if this is approved and this is what we're building, there has to be some plan for GMS also. And there are fields there that we own, and we've had complaints about students going through the path in the woods and down the hill and so forth. So, I think getting the fields up closer to the school would make sense.
Get them out of that swamp line.
Yeah.
It's always wet. Those fields are always wet, especially early spring.
A lot of that too depends on what happens with the site.
That's correct. But I would imagine, you're not going to sell just the building and put some weird dotted line across the fields. It's sort of that lower area is what somebody else may be interested in for another purpose. And then I think we, could take the funds from that sale or what have you and utilize them to finish developing the Upper Peninsula or the upper plot for LMS.
Way down the line.
Yep. Well, this is easy, Jen. This is outdoors. This isn't
Yeah.
outside your office.
Great.
Other questions for Kyle or thoughts on where we are? Kyle, I'm looking at it and I'm saying, so what is it we bring forward to the voters? And conceptually, this feels pretty good. I'm not sure that from a,
Like as a presentation?
yeah, why do we want to buy this land and can you fit a school there? I think this dots I's and crosses T's for people. And it provides a visual and an understanding that can really rally some folks.
Is the dark line on the left-hand side, goes up and down, is that the boundary line of the properties on Westview, the backyard?
This line here, right here,
Oh, I can't see where your cursor is, way over to the left, the straight line up and down.
this one?
Yeah, Jen can point to it.
That's
That
Oh,
one.
no, that's just a cutoff of it. So let me toggle back for a second, Brian. If you look back here, you can see the wetlands lines that are on the other map. And they're basically, that other map just truncates across here because we're not interested in everything in the wetlands or to the left. So the Westview properties are here.
Right.
And what do you got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of them with then the one house at the end being the 7th
Right.
property at the end, right? So now let's toggle back. They're not specifically drawn on here, but you would have one in this area, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So really the school building will be about the length of the, from the corner on Albuquerque here, and then going back, those properties would all reside in this area.
Yeah, I think it will be important to keep a wooded buffer there and along Albuquerque.
We want to find a compromise between, in the center of town. Think about where we are here. You see the town hall, you know it's here, but there's trees,
Yep.
and it feels natural. And so I think it's hitting the right balance. Like, you want to know there is a school there. Like,
Right.
you should be able to find it and not drive down Albuquerque and miss it.
or McKelvey. Or,
Like LMS, like who
Yeah.
would think there's a school at the end of, and we have a sign this big on top of the McElwain sign, and that's it, right? So, so I think it's finding the right balancing point, but then to Dan's point, you also want a degree of security, because if a kid runs out a door and sprints for Albuquerque, you want to have safety that you can not have them running out into traffic there, because Albuquerque's pretty busy. So it's finding the right balancing point with buffers and yet still letting people visually see the school.
So this might be a question for Kyle. They develop wooded areas all the time. There's a lot of hunting in there. A lot of hunting. I'm just curious how that normally, with the school right there, and they're still gonna continue hunting to the other side of it.
It'd be
Is-
300 feet.
Huh?
Gotta be 300 feet from
Yeah, but how do you?
any building. You'd have to have probably Fish and Game come down and put up signs.
Post it.
Post it. Basically no hunting.
I mean, on a regular basis, the hunters don't get the deers, but I see the deer run across Albuquerque when I'm with the dog. You know, 2 days ago, a big fox went across, you know, like 10 feet from us. It's like, but there's always a truck parked
Yes.
right at the
Yeah.
end of that section, and they're always hunting.
Yep.
But I mean, they build buildings all over the place where there's hunting in the past, and just, that's just a concern that there's so many people that do hunt in that area.
They can post the property line, and then you're supposed to be 300 feet from that, or any occupied building.
Hopefully they abide by it.
Hopefully, yep. I'm sure they'll figure out there's a school there.
Yeah.
I think it's a good point, Brian, because, you know, I see the same truck there, so there's somebody who hunts that property pretty routinely.
Yeah.
Not this one. This, I don't see them on this, now they could
No,
go
'cause a little-
in
the
from the
drive is just
neighbor
a little
and,
further down.
you know, access back in there, I'm not sure, but.
But I guess it's no different right now. If they do hunt in that area, you have the backyard of the houses there now.
Right.
But again, you got quite a buffer of woods also.
Any other questions for Kyle on the map? I'm gonna shift the conversation then, if I may, to, let me go back to the agenda for a second. So, the Warrant article, so tomorrow night is the public hearing on the Warrant articles. The draft Warrant article is on the agenda for you, and I'll read it out loud for the folks at home. Shall the Litchfield School District raise and appropriate the sum of $497,000 for the purchase of approximately 35 acres of land with no buildings or improvements thereon, shown as tax map 15, lot number 8 on Litchfield tax maps. The parcel is also known as BL 114 Albuquerque Avenue, Litchfield, New Hampshire, and further approve the seller's condition of the sale, which is that the district will name the school to be constructed thereon the Robin Riley Elementary School. This warrant article will be a special non-lapsing appropriation per RSA 32:7 Roman 6, and will not lapse until the closing on the property takes place once the construction of a new school is funded and approved by voters, or by June 30th, 2029, whichever is sooner. And the Budget Committee did vote 6-3-0 to support that. The board has not taken a vote yet, and so I won't even project what that vote may be, but the board sentiment around this has been pretty positive, so, but they'll be recording a vote on this pretty soon. And the only question that we have received from the Budget Committee, and I think representing the public, is, you know, if June 30th of 2029 comes and the voters never approved, so this is now lapsing, what happens to the nearly $500,000 that was set aside? And the answer is, because it lapses on that date, the money goes back to the taxpayers. But I have an inquiry into Gordon to say, you know, we can either explain that over and over verbally, or should we insert language to this that makes that clear? You know, if that doesn't happen, at which point the money will be returned to the taxpayers, just so it's really clear in the warrant. So that's the only variation that might still occur with this warrant.
That seems to me like that would be the most, we're always using the word transparent, but upfront and out in the open of, here's what will happen if that doesn't happen.
And I think, you know, in legalese, it lapses, which means that's what occurs, right? But I think to really shine the spotlight on it, just verbalize, in which case the money goes back. So it doesn't get kept and used for some other thing, so.
Well, I think what that is also showing is that the money doesn't change hands with the current owner until the school is funded as well. So at no point will the school district own the property until there is approved funding for the actual school. So if Article 2 passes, which this is Article 2, then the $497,000 would go into a school bank account and would stay there until one of those two things happen. The funding for the school was passed, or it lapsed, at which point it would go right back to the taxpayers.
And one other piece for those, if you've looked at the purchase and sales, it sort of has a 2-year window to get the school approved. You know, it's possible that there won't be a warrant for the school approval this year, So that means really next year is the only time that lines up with the purchase and sales. But if that were to fail, we would have to approach the seller to see if they'd be willing to extend it. And obviously, if they said no, it was a 2-year offer and it's now expired, it would allow us to, at that point, say, well, then we don't need the funds. Or my hunch is that the motivation to sell this property for a school named after Robin Riley is fairly high. And, we could then do a year-by-year extension of the agreement if that was something that the seller wanted to do. So, just, again, full transparency, some of you may say, but it doesn't say you have until 29. That's accurate. We would have to go back to the seller to see if that's something they wanted to do. But the June of 29 is the way the RSA is written. You have 5 years from the year in which the appropriation takes place. So we just added 5 years on to 2024 because the funds would then be available in the next year, and in the which would end in June of 24. So you add 5 onto that to get to June of 29.
So as of now, you haven't had any conversation with the owners to extend it at this time?
We absolutely have not. Nope. I'm being optimistic, Brian, that March of 24 is gold for us. We'll see. So that brings us to the next question, which is the New Hampshire building aid. And I'm going to display here the press release that came from the state. I'm going to have to blow that up a little bit so people can actually read it. But basically, there were 17 projects that were submitted and deemed eligible for building aid. You'll notice that if all 17 projects were to be funded, it would cost $227 million. It's the largest number of applications received for the school building aid program since the moratorium was listed in 2020. I think that's really noteworthy because, projects have been delayed during the moratorium. People have been saying, what are we going to do here? I mean, we know the story of Griffin. There were attempts between 2000 and 2008 to build a new school, and that all got stalled in 2008, but it didn't solve the problem. We had our building continue to deteriorate and the needs become more pronounced. So it's not a surprise to me that there's that much of an ask, and the state in the past and by law has been allocating $50 million. And so that's obviously a fraction of what is being requested by the schools. You can see in the list that Griffin Memorial came in at spot number 5. And the problem is that the $50 million would fund spots 1, 2, and 3. So the Nancy Loud and School Street project in the Rochester School District is the number 1 highest ranked. They would get funding from the state. Colebrook Academy and Elementary School, that's a consolidation project way up north. They would get funding from the state. And then the Emerson Elementary School, Gilsum STEAM Academy, Mount Caesar Elementary, Troy Elementary, and Cutler Elementary, which are all in the Monadnock Regional over in the Keene area, they would receive funding. And at that point, the funding would be absorbed if there was only $50 million available. Above us is Runlet Middle School. And then we come in at position number 5 based on the overall ranking. So,
Is Runlet in Concord?
yes, I'm sorry. Runlet is the middle school in Concord, and I'm going to switch to another sheet in a second to talk about those projects. But basically, we have to realize that position number 5 is our official ranking, and let me switch to the other sheet just so we can understand a couple of things about it. I'm going to blow this up too so that readers at home can follow the numbers a little bit better. Here at the top, Litchfield Griffin Memorial School, you can see that we got 642 points, which placed us in that 5th place slot. But one thing that's interesting is that if you look at the category, so unsafe conditions, fire safety, we received 47th out of 70 points, which tied us in 4th place for unsafe conditions on the list. And if you do unsafe condition structural, we got 0 out of 30, which puts us tied for last with actually a lot of schools. If you look at that list, there's a lot of schools that didn't get any points in structural category. Unsafe conditions other, we received 50 points, which tied us for first place. In unsafe conditions for environmental conditions, we received 50 points, which also tied us in first place. Kyle, I'm assuming a lot of that environmental has to do with water?
I really don't know. I haven't had a conversation with Amy about what the details of their determination is.
Thank you. And then the other is unsafe conditions, traffic, and we also tied in first place. So I think it's really noteworthy that when you think about safety, we got a lot of first place ties for the safety conditions at Griffin. Security updates, we got 67 out of 100 points, which tied us in 8th place. Inefficient or unsuitable conditions to the building envelope, we got 20, which tied us for first. Inefficient or unsuitable conditions with mechanical, electrical, and plumbing, we got 20 points, which tied us for first. Got to move sideways here.
It's interesting that we got all of them, 20 out of 20. It's not just 20 that we got first. There were only 20 points possible.
We got an A, but it's not an A. It's really an F.
Efficiency.
Inefficient or unsuitable conditions for educational spaces, we got 27 out of 40 points, which ties us in 4th place. For operational efficiency, we got 33 out of 50, which is a 6th place ranking. For maintenance, we got 125 points out of 125, which tied us for first. And by the way, maintenance means, if Kyle, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was the fact that we submitted a plan at how we were going to adhere to maintaining a new building. You had to show evidence that you were.
Not maintenance on the current building.
That's right. That's not about, we got points because we haven't maintained the old building. This is, we have a plan to maintain a new building if it's
Did you
received.
get points for that?
Everyone got the
I was
full
gonna
points.
say, max points, all right.
Yep.
So we're tied for first and tied for last.
And then for high performance design, energy and resource efficiency, we got 100 points, which tied for first. Remember, we're looking at a net zero building here, and so that kicked us up. If you look at the other schools that received 0 points, it was sort of an all or nothing, it looks like. I'm not sure anybody else. Monadnock got 50 points, but we scored well there. This is the category free and reduced lunch. We got 0 out of 200 points because the population in Litchfield of free and reduced students, in other words, the measure of the town's poverty, does not score us a lot of points in that category. And so we ended up with 0 in that. And then we have preserving historical elements. We got 0 out of 25 because we're building new. There really isn't a...
Only one got anything, right?
Yeah, Monadnock picked up 25 points, so they must be renovating a historic building to earn some points. But we're not doing that. We're building new, so we got nothing in that category. So if we go back over to the rankings, and Doug put this spreadsheet together because where is the other category? Oh. So our 642 is the number of points that we got. If you deduct out the free and reduced lunches and you say, okay, let's just compare structure to structure, which is really project to project, apples to apples. It doesn't matter what the wealth of the community is. It doesn't matter what the poverty level is. What's the need of the building? Then we score 642 points because we don't change. We don't deduct anything. But we go from 5th place up to 2nd. And I think that's really an important thing to keep in mind here, is that based on the building needs, based on the educational facility needs, we're the 2nd neediest school in the state. And the highest school in the state is Colebrook Academy at 672 points. So in other words, they beat us by 30 points based on the school facility alone.
I also think it's worth, even when you factor in the free and reduced, so just the actual score, there's a pretty we're like in last place of the first tier. if that makes sense. Because because they're all in the same ballpark. We're at 642. All the rest of them are kind of 700. At 642, the next one. So the difference from 5 to 6 is 642 to 495. If I'm reading this correctly.
So if
there's
you-
a big gap between, like, so that's why I say we're like last place of tier 1, and
Well-
then tier 2 is
I think the 5 neediest schools create a plateau.
Yeah.
There's like real common need in there, and you can do this free and reduced analysis, and you kind of reshuffle the deck among the 5.
yeah.
But they're all the 5 that are clearly the neediest.
Yeah.
To your point, the next school behind us is Derry, which is at 495 points. So,
Yeah.
You're 100 and some odd points.
It's 150,
Lower.
almost 150 points. Like it's a drop off. Like
It's interesting to put that much weight, though, on free and reduced lunch. I mean, it's the largest number that you can, like, earn. And I realize, I mean, it's just more or less like the poverty level or the income level of that particular town, but,
It's all about property taxes.
right, but then you're talking all the different deficiency categories of the
Right.
schools that you think that would play as equal a part.
Yeah.
is that the Colebrook rule? Is that where that comes in? Is that like not necessarily, but isn't the Colebrook decision like the sending down the
The property tax base.
the donor towns versus
Yeah.
the
Towns versus the receiver town.
Claremont? Sorry, not Colebrook. Claremont.
I think what the legislature is trying to recognize is that communities who have the higher poverty levels are going to have a harder time passing a bond. So, the thing is and this is not a whine about it, because I have worked in a community like that, and it's hard to get something accomplished because you have so many people that are really struggling with their property. But you're awarding points in terms of the rank, and because you have the higher level, you're qualifying for more aid. So it's sort of a double-edged win, if you would, because, Rochester, let's go back to the other chart for a second, which ended up, I think, being the #1 school, correct? The Rochester schools. And they qualify, so they got 200 points for free and reduced, which catapulted them up to #1. I mean, 200 points is a significant jump, right? And then they get 60%
It's
building aid.
60% building aid?
Yeah, so we got 0 points, and we get 30% building aid. So the free and reduced population, you're rewarded twice. You go higher in the list, and you get more money as a result of being higher in the list. Kyle, I want to make sure I'm explaining that right from your understanding of the rules.
I don't think it's a coincidence that the top 3 ranks are the top 3, what's the word I'm looking for? Highest funding rates. So, like you said, they get 60%, Colbert gets 60%, and Monadnock gets 55%. And then it drops down to Concord at, I think, 40, correct? And then it drops down to Litchfield at 30. So, yeah, pretty much everybody below us is, 30 or 40%. The only ones that are up in the 50s and 60s are the ones that rank the top. It's not a coincidence.
And so part of what we were hoping to do is have this dialogue with our legislators. And I think it's important that we become pretty active at examining the pot of money, because let's assume for a minute that $50 million is the amount the legislation has, and that's what's made available, then we're going to get 0. If the pot is increased to $100 million, then it's possible that money would be available to us. And part of it is we're still going through how much, even though the schools have a dollar amount allocated, they have to finish flushing out the what do they actually qualify for. So some of these schools may have put in for money that isn't going to qualify under the state law. So we just submitted to the state a clarifying statement as to where we are with our project and how many square feet and so forth. The other schools are doing the same thing. I don't know how deep in the list they're going, but if I'm the administrator with limited time at the state, I'm at least having the top 5 schools go through that exercise. And the fact that they asked us to, I thought was pretty helpful, because they want to know exactly where we land. I doubt they're having school number 17 go through that exercise, but you never know. So So anyway, I think one strategy we should keep in mind is that if our community rallies and can increase the amount of money in the pot, then in March of '24, we could have an answer that says, yes, there is some money available to us. And that would be really beneficial to a bond vote, because I don't think a bond vote without building aid is going to be favorable. So that's something that gives us a rallying point, I think. The other thing is, and this is trickier, but if the other towns that qualified, Rochester, Monadnock, Colebrook, if they end up not funding at the local level the project, then, because remember, Rochester still has to find 40% of the building project, and it's a poorer community than us. And so if they were to turn around and say, we don't agree with this, we're not going to do it, that money is then left in the pot and could be available to Litchfield in March. But that's I think there's one thing we can actively do to try to help ourselves, which is get more money. And then I think the other is, it's more sinister, because you hope somebody else doesn't fund their project, and therefore something's available for us. And I'd rather not, that's got negative energy to it. I'd rather not focus on that as a solution. So, Kyle, did I explain all that correctly? I want to make sure I got the dynamics of it right.
Yes, there is one other component. It's another negative aspect to it, though. Amy Clark at the state asked us to explain a couple of the numbers that are part of our application, the most critical being the funding cap on the square foot per student ratio. And so you got to understand that they're applying the same rules, not just against us, but everybody else. And so just like if another district doesn't pass their bond vote, and there might be some money left. Also, if they don't meet the funding cap and their amount is reduced, it might leave some in this year's biennium for a project like Litchfield. If you take Rochester as an example, it's the same number of students, it's the same size and cost as what we submitted for Litchfield. So I'm assuming that they're using the same kind of numbers, the same kind of square foot per student and all that. If we end up being reduced because of that cap, then we can also safely assume that Rochester would be reduced. But here's where their funding level works against them. For every square foot that they take out, they lose 60% funding, whereas you only lose 30%. It could happen that they lose enough that it matches what you would be getting from the state, and therefore leaving enough money in this biennium for Litchfield.
So
Now,
we just don't
it
know.
would first go to Concord. They would offer it to Concord. Concord's asking for 70 million. So if they have, say, 7 or 8 million left over, Concord's going to say, no, we're going to wait for the bigger pot of money, because it's one and done. They can't go back afterwards. If they take the 7 million, they're not going to get the rest of it later. So my feeling is that Concord will probably bow out until the next biennium in any one of those scenarios. So there is a good chance. It's not better than even odds, but there is still a good hope that you could get funded in this biennium, meaning July of 2024.
And then that's when we put the project, the building.
Well,
We'd be able to put a bond vote knowing
yeah, so
what the state has left for us.
Yeah.
and so a bond vote in March of '24 that says contingent on, because the problem is in March, if the other districts all passed one,
Right.
we'd get zero. So we'd have to have a contingency that we're willing to do this contingent on
Yeah.
state aid. And I've seen those bond articles
That's
written
what
that
we
way.
did at high school too.
No, you say Rochester puts it up this March. It fails. They can again put it up next March
Correct.
and still, okay. They're always, it's not like once you lose a vote, you get bumped down the list. Like you're always ahead of us on the list.
They have two chances, this March, next March. If
Okay.
they fail next March as well, then they're off the list. But one more potential scenario on top of that is that, say they go forward, they get funded, this biennium is done, if Litchfield passes the bond contingent on funding, then Litchfield stays on the list for the next biennium. You can't get kicked off. But if you don't pass it, you're kicked off and you have to reapply for funding. And now we're competing against another 17 districts. And who knows, there might be another Rochester or Colebrook in that list. So passing a bond, even without the funding, is really important to stay on the list.
Okay. It's all good information to have.
It would just be passing a bond without the guarantee.
Yeah, but you wouldn't actually sell the bond until you had the guarantee. But
Yeah.
if you make it contingent. So yeah, the bond's been passed. Now people are saying, oh, Litchfield's serious, as long as they're getting the
This
30%.
Yeah.
So,
So you would word the warrant that it'd be contingent on getting state aid? And if you don't get state aid, you don't get the bond.
correct.
The only problem is that 30% is set at the number we came up with in August
Right.
of 2022. And who knows what the cost of the project would be in March of
Inflationary
24,
costs
25,
might have
26.
consumed that 30%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if you don't make a contingent on it, then 100% is
Yep.
funded by the local taxpayers.
So you wouldn't
So
try to push a bond without state aid?
you could, Brian, but I think it's an uphill battle from,
I think it's all an uphill battle.
Our goal is, yeah, to get state
Yeah.
aid.
I think we, we need to also come to terms with the fact that we may not get state aid.
If you don't get the bond, though.
Right, I know. So, I mean, it's definitely a litmus test, but clearly the need is there.
the need is there.
Absolutely. So,
Well, on Friday when I pulled the winning ticket,
Yeah, I got a story about that.
Litchfield.
Yeah, but the school's already named, Dan.
That's fine.
Not the road.
The road. Yeah.
Mitchell
Mitchell
Way.
Road.
Mitchell
Ball
Way.
field. Yeah, the play field.
What's your favorite color? We'll paint it.
I guess one thing I want to point out as far as the legislature goes is that, granted, they could change and not fund education next year, but the trend seems to be that they are committed to doing this. And so if you're being number 5, if the first 3 get funded this biennium, would mean you're number 2 in the next biennium. You can't get kicked off the list as long as you're supporting the project. So the chances of getting funded suddenly just went up considerably by us landing number 5 in the list.
Which is March of 26, right? Do I have that right? 25, March of 25. Not a time period we really want to think about because we want to do this sooner, but that's a possibility.
In 20 years, what's another year?
30 years.
And I think as we look at Concord being before us, even though right now they're on paper for around 70 million, I don't believe any of us have high confidence that at the end of the day that they would qualify for the 70 million knowing their price per square foot. I don't want to put you on the spot, Kyle, but would you agree with that?
I totally agree with that. If you go by the state's funding cap numbers, they're building a school for 900 students. You can figure out what they're going to get from the state, and it's not anywhere close to what they're asking for. The other thing to keep in mind is that Concord does not have a site. The site that they were going to purchase, the seller pulled out. And last time I heard, they don't even have an architect, that they just put out an RFP for architects. So they're way behind where we are in terms of being ready. So I would picture that it's possible that when they get to March of 20, or see, they're not on the same schedule. They can vote anytime. But when we get to the next biennium, they might still not be ready. So therefore, they might not be taking the money. So if there is money left over, you could end up being number 1 just by default.
Kyle, does that still go to a referendum or a ballot item for the
Concord School
taxpayers and
Board is
residents?
completely autonomous.
You're talking in Concord?
Yeah.
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 You have how many member school board is that? I can't remember. 9? 9 or 11? Anyway, and they totally make that decision.
Yeah.
They are autonomous. There is no town meeting, there's no vote.
Even in other cities, there's a joint committee between the aldermen and the school board members that make these decisions. Not in Concord. It's the only town or city in the state that operates that way.
So are they a tax collection agent?
Yeah, I believe so. So,
It's a lot of good
but I think there's an interesting point Kyle made. I'm going to try to drive it home, and then Kyle, correct me if I overstate it. But if you compare the cost of our project and the size of our project to the one being proposed in Rochester, they're almost similar, like in terms of the size of the school and the amount of money, which sort of reinforces that our numbers aren't pie in the sky numbers, that they're pretty well grounded, because it's not a Taj Mahal at all. Those projects totally compare in terms of meeting future educational needs of about the same number of students. That's not the case, because we're looking at a 450 to 500 student school for 35 million. So I would think a 900 student school would, even if you doubled it, and you're not going to double everything because you don't need 2 gyms or, et cetera, you're then looking at an overall $70 million, $65 million project. And then when you look at Concord, their ask is like $160 million or $180 million. It's like, what are you building? And that's the point that I think Kyle's making, which is there's no way all of that is going to qualify. If they want to build that type of school in the city, they're autonomous and they can do it, and they can answer to their taxpayers for that. But there's no way the state aid is going to follow that. And Kyle, did I make that right comparison?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's no way they're going to get that amount of money. Well, in fact, what I do know is that, as I live in Concord, and I've read the news reports, that they were trying to build the school with the YMCA. And so I think that half of that amount of money is the Y, which is not eligible for state building aid. So they made a lot of mistakes in their building aid application, and I'm kind of curious to see how it shakes out. That's why I'm saying I don't think that they're well set up to move forward, that they're not organized enough, they don't have the right numbers. It wouldn't surprise me if they choose to delay their funding, which would put you up higher in the list. And like I said, if I could power something home, there is still a chance that there could be money left over this biennium, meaning that you could have that money available in July of 2024.
I'll give you, this was a Christmas Eve discussion with somebody who lives in the North Country about the Colbert project. And I'm like, hey, what's the tenor in town about that? And, the sense was, well, there's some necessity to consolidating, but there's some aspects to the school that are really causing people to scratch their heads. Like, oh, well, we can't just use the one gym. I mean, you're talking about a senior class of 10 kids. Just to ground for a second what is going on in Colbert. There are 10 kids in the senior class. But now when you consolidate into the one facility, which will be K-12, they want to add a second gym, so that you have a high school gym and an elementary gym. And there are people in the community saying, we don't need 2 gyms. We should be able to figure out how to have, this number of students share one gym. So my point is, if you start to listen to what's going on in other communities, we know what our uphill battle is. We're pushing a boulder up a hill to a degree. Well, so are the other communities, and so I think it's just who's got more staying power to figure this and to get it to the finish line.
So it's a lot of information, but it's also a lot of let's wait and see what everybody else does.
It's chess. We are in a chess match, aren't we? And it's like,
yes.
How does that move? I almost want to set a chessboard up and label the pieces, the other districts, and then just, okay, so what happened over there? But we have to pay attention. And, there are bills in Concord now to increase the amount of building aid. And that's part of what I was hoping we'd be able to reinforce with our reps is that, in a sharply divided legislature, where bipartisanship is going to be necessary to get probably anything accomplished this time. If we can have our reps understand that, they just had in the news today that there's been a huge surplus in taxes received. It way exceeded what was expected. And so what do you do with some of that surplus? You can save it for another rainy day. Or I think that putting it into things like school building projects that will allow the economy to keep plugging ahead as the economy slows, I think it's logically a good thing to do. But we just have to make that point and make that point often to the folks who will vote on it.
Mike, I've got another meeting starting in about 10 minutes. Is there some other, I got 10 minutes, but is there something you wanted me to talk about?
Let me ask if people have questions or comments for Kyle.
So,
I'm distracted by the thought of an $80 million Y.
Yeah.
If it's half the project.
So,
I don't even know what an 80 million independent Y looks like.
So I have to, let me just, for a second, if you have, because we've talked about that community aspect, right?
Yeah.
So if you partner with the Y and you have your before school and after school programs operated by the Y that's attached, if there's a real memo of understanding, and by the way, if it happens to come with a pool,
Yeah.
And all of the other stuff, I love the concept of where they're going with it, but I think you have to figure out who's paying for that. I'm not sure that the Concord taxpayers, at least I'm looking at one shaking his head. So I think there's a real partnership opportunity, but I think sometimes it can go too far and
I think
it
if you
gets
take all
really
the
blurry.
Ys in the state of New Hampshire, they're not worth $80 million.
In the post-Columbine environment where we're trying to make schools safe, I think it's a very bad idea to be inviting the general public onto the property to attend the Y. It would make it very difficult to keep those populations separate. So I've studied this in other districts before, not necessarily on that scale, but even little things like trying to combine it with the town library or other things like that. It's never worked out because of safety and security.
Well, I do think that the potential has to be segmenting off what the Y offers. So that you take the downtown Concord Y location, which is, you talk about a tight piece of property.
Yeah.
I mean, there's not a lot there. But if you consolidate that to adult services, right? So I agree, Kyle, we don't want pickleball taking place in the middle of a school day, right? But if you can get that to be the adult YMCA component, and then some of the children and youth services more attached to the school. But the other concept of the Y is it's for families, and I'm not sure you want to go over here to work out and drop the kids over there. So it's really, there's a lot that has to be fleshed out with that. It sounds great on paper, but the devil's in the details.
And so just to add, if anyone starts watching now, we're not talking about a Y in Litchfield, it's in Concord. So Concord is talking about attaching a Y to their middle school. We are not talking about attaching anything to the proposed
Doug,
elementary school.
you got great perspective. That is important on this one. All right, anything else for Kyle? Kyle, thank you. And again, I think the public has to understand that, this work has really, I think, met the expectations of the facilities committee, the work of drafting and then responding to how can we fit this in there. Kyle's been very responsive to that, and the building aid stuff, it's a double-edged sword for Kyle because he's schooled himself up on the regulations, so much so he's now been asked to be a part of a committee to study them. So it's one of those, you get really good at something and then what happens? You get asked to be on the committee. So
Congratulations.
Kyle, congratulations for that. But I do think you're going to serve well because you do understand it, and I think you understand in diverse communities that the way the same rules apply have different impacts. And I know people look at Litchfield as not a community with high poverty levels, but we're also not a community with a large commercial tax base, and so the ask is on individual property tax owners, which creates a separate problem for us when we're trying to sell a bond. So I just don't know what the answer is, but you can't set rules that apply equally and fairly to everybody, I guess.
There is one thing I wanted to chime in on, and I guess first, thanks for that vote of confidence there. It does seem like I know a little too much. That's dangerous when I get to talking to the state, and some of the funding caps that they have in place are just unreasonable. I understand why they're there, and I think it's good that they are there, but the numbers are just wrong. So we'll be working with that and trying to get the waiver from the state and that kind of stuff. But one thing you said earlier, kind of mentioned a little bit, and I just want to point out, is that, yes, that the delay in the project for a year or more will erode the value of the building aid because of inflation. And that, people have read the news and know that inflation's been bad over the last 12 months. But what I think that people don't understand is just how much more severe inflation has been on construction costs. So when we get back into this and hopefully get the funding from the state and start negotiating with them. One of the things we need to ask the state is, can we get an increase due to the inflation? That the inflation that we've seen in the last 12 months has been unprecedented in construction history that I've ever seen, and that I think it deserves another look from the state. If they increase the funding for, funding more projects, they ought to also increase the funding to help us with dealing with that inflation, so that the building aid isn't just completely eroded by that.
Really good point. Very good point, Kyle.
That the $35 million that we put in the building aid application is no longer effective. That it's been that bad over the last 12 months.
Anything else on GMS? We'll let Kyle get off to his other meeting, and we'll shift into LMS updates if we're ready. All right, Kyle, thank you so much.
Thanks.
Have a great night.
That was very
We'll see you.
sportscaster of you. If you're just joining us.
Just in.
This just in, latest breaking news.
Yeah. If you're just joining us from channel.
Actually, I'm going to leave that open just in case one of our reps joins us. You never know. That link's out there. So, LMS project updates. So I've said enough about GMS. I'm going to look to our principal and our business administrator, who are in all the meetings I am, and ask them to comment and give an update as to where we stand on our
So I think
waning days of this phase.
waning days. I think I'm going to start with the elephant in the room, or the rumor mill that churns about heat, no heat, what's going on at LMS. At no point in time have we had no heat. At LMS, we have had heat ongoing, but we did have a fantastic perfect storm that occurred on that Friday before school vacation, and that perfect storm, while it took our power and sent us home a little bit early on that Friday before winter vacation here, Christmas vacation, it also did fry one of our brand new heating units up on the roof, half of it. So there are two compressors that are ongoing in the heating units. One runs, the other is backup, and when it needs it, it calls for that backup to turn on. And one of those units fried over vacation, while leaving one of the units with only one working compressor. That was not recognized over vacation because there was nobody in the classrooms, there was nobody in the rooms to see what was going on. So when we came back to school, well, I think the Friday before we came back to school, they realized, oop, this is not working. This seems to be a bit of a challenge. They put some space heaters out and about around the building to help get the building fully up to temperature, because with only one compressor going, it was not meeting its full capacity. And the space heaters were part of the backup plan that we had all along in order to have that extra support in case. So when students arrived back at school last Tuesday, classroom temperatures were chilly for sure, because they had gone so long empty and no heat running in them. Because when they figured the problem out, they allowed that one compressor to turn back on and then heat the whole building, or heat those classrooms. The space heaters were provided for support heat, and they recognized and ordered those parts based on warranty for what they needed. And those parts have arrived, and as of this afternoon, we started to smell some new heat smell because they turned them back on, and things are getting back to that full normal capacity, because they were running on the new units prior to vacation, because that was the first phase. The place where it was cold was in, if you have a 5th grader, a 6th grader, or a 7th grader, it was around that courtyard space, which was that very first phase that was completed this summer, and they've been on that system all fall. So it's not new for them. It was up and running and working. We were not having trouble with low temperatures. We were not having trouble with running out of oil. There were so many rumors that I've heard through the grapevine. None of them came through the office. Again, it's that fancy place where we all go to talk about what's going on without asking the questions of what's really going on, which is why we tried to clarify in the links on Friday to say, we're hearing rumors, but here's the deal of what is really happening, and we're working on getting that fixed. And it is a result of a freak. A tree coming down on Pinecrest caused that power surge to go through, and we recognize that as a challenge and have those backup plans in place to mitigate that difficulty. On a happy note, unrelated to no heat or low heat, is we're almost there. We're so close to being back to full normal tilt. This afternoon they were putting up ceiling tiles, so we're going from that open concept look in the hallways back to the industrial look with the open ducts and open places. They're putting those back up in the hallways. We received back, as of Tuesday last week, we received back all except the music room. So all classes are back in and functioning in their home space except for Mrs. Late and the band, who will be going back as of Wednesday next week. Then everybody will be back home in their location, and we'll be entering our final phase of construction, which is just the mechanical room in the back of the building where they'll be working in that area. We'll still see trucks around. We'll still hear the North Branch guys around. And what's also great is that they've become part of our LMS family community, and then the kids are looking at doing something to send off our North Branch helpers, because you see those blue hats, you see those guys in those bright vests walking around the building all day, every day, and some of those faces have been very familiar to our students and our staff, and they've been so helpful when anything has gone awry. We're looking to find a way to thank them for what they have done for us to get us, to recognize that we're a school in operation and to allow us to get work done with minimal disruption. Has not been a perfect year by any stretch of the imagination, but I think, we've made lemonade out of lemons and functioned through this year pretty well overall. As of Friday, we will be completely off of fossil fuels, because the last thing that we have right now that is running off of the oil tank are the water heaters. And on Friday after school, those water heaters, the oil water heaters, will be turned off. They'll be draining the system. And when we come back after this long weekend coming up, we will be on 100% electricity, shifting into the plan for the solar, which is coming February, March.
Could we get a hose installed up in the oil tank down to GMS?
From the what?
In the oil tank from LMS, just run it down to GMS and just
Doug and I are
sub pump it down the hill.
talking with a couple of people about how to transfer the oil. So Dave thinks there's about 6,000 gallons.
We last measured, yep.
We topped it off back in July at last year's
June,
oil rates, June,
Because the price was so low, yep.
and there'll still be 6,000 gallons. So really, the challenge is how can we get it down to your tank to use it up?
So it's tough having 6,000 gallons left, but I think the good part of it is that it showed how much the building envelope was really sealed up, because that heat that was in there got retained. And also, we just haven't had much of a cold winter so far as well.
We've filled up GMS twice already, where in middle school we haven't added a drop. So
Well, and you
it's significant.
You also have to consider the fact that more than half of our building was onto that new system from the start of the school year.
Yep.
As soon as we became occupied, we haven't been on fossil fuels on that side, really, for anything.
So the
Have we
plan,
since installed surge protectors?
So we have a meeting scheduled for next Monday or Tuesday, I think it is. Monday's the holiday. So Tuesday, we're meeting with our electrical engineer and our design team. And Kay, we scheduled it around when Kay was available to join us, because, I just got thinking, my goodness, if it can zap, we're still tied to the grid with the solar. So if there's a charge coming in that can zap a piece of instrument, why couldn't it also do something to damage the solar? So we need to ask that question and get it answered. And then at some point, I think we need to go back to Eversource also to, ask the question about protection from their side of it, because this is not the first surge to occur down at LMS.
Correct.
And so I think we just want to get our ducks in a row with everybody who understands electricity way above what I do, and then ask the right questions and involve the right people. But you're right, Brian, we got to get it resolved. All that equipment is expensive, and it needs to be protected.
The fact that I'm able to explain any of this shocks me. If you had asked me a year ago, what I know about compressors and power surges, I would have said not a chance, but sitting in all of these construction meetings and listening intently and keeping in mind what's happening with our kids and how it makes them safe and comfortable, I'm learning an awful lot.
Good job.
I mean, luckily it's covered, under warranty. I mean, generally something like that you wouldn't think would be covered.
Right.
So the parts are covered under warranty, the labor is not.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So when are we looking at the solar install? You mentioned February, March.
So we have been in conversations. So as I said, the last classroom is getting cleaned and returned to us on January 18th,
Okay.
which will then shift them into that final phase of construction, which should wrap up by February 17th.
Okay.
At which point North Branch will be decommissioning. So we will no longer see the fence and all the trailers and all the connexes all around the perimeter of LMS. You'll start to see those things disappearing from our property, which is that break in their phase. Because remember, there is still the work to be done in the cafeteria and the kitchen, which is so important that they have space to cook and get all those things accomplished. But because of those delays and timelines, that work won't start until after school is out this summer, which will be all completed next summer while they're here. So the solar work will be starting over February vacation and into March is when they'll start to get those up onto the roof and get them connected and live, and we'll be working with Kay to make that happen and transitioning away from the North Branch phase of the project and into the power supply.
Great.
There are some, there's questions about intertie and getting everything tweaked and adjusted on the system, because remember, the system is actively monitoring what's being generated by the sun, metering that against what comes from Eversource. So, Kay had said to us that all of that tweaking and adjusting brings us into July, by the time they can really say, we got it. Because we've asked the question about when we would be responsible for payments, and it really kicks over into July before we have to worry about it, because it's going to take that long to install and adjust. It's not just the array, you've got the battery backup system and the way those are intertied. So it'll be an ongoing project, but we'll be reaping benefits of it during that time period too. So.
And once it's operational, or once we've proven that we've met our goals for energy
Rebates.
So we have two known rebates from Eversource. One of them, it will happen sometime, we believe, this fall, and that's once the project is complete. And by the project, it's really the cafeteria work that they're doing, because they're the heating and the envelope there as well. So at that point, we'll get around $63,000 from Eversource, and then a year later, once our bills prove our dependence on electricity or fossil fuels went down. Obviously, fossil fuels will go down, but also just the cost to heat and any electrical cost. Once we prove that we met our measures, then we'll get another roughly around $63,000 from Eversource.
Good. Thank you.
I had the pleasure today, I was invited into a call with Senator Hassan, and the question that I asked was for any assistance with helping nonprofits and schools to understand with the Inflation Reduction Act, which also contains some funding that we believe our project may qualify for. So we're waiting for the rules to be finalized. But I asked the senator directly to have her, ask her staff to help speed that process along, because timing-wise, knowing prior to voting in March would be better than finding out on March 30th that there's some additional rebates or funding that we were qualified for. So I did push that, and she made note of that, and her staff made note of that. So hopefully, if there are funds, which we believe there are, but if there are funds that we're eligible for, that we'll be able to get that update too. That would be a big plus.
Oh, the other great news is you may notice on the front of LMS, we added rain gutters, which help with the splash across under the portico awning, whatever you want to call that, out in the front center. Before, if rain was coming, it was a heavy rain day, it would splash down on the sides and wash right across, and then when it is cold and iced over, it was a dangerous location to come across. So there are now gutters that come down across, run down along the side of the awning, which keep it safe for people that are entering and exiting LMS under that awning.
Anything else about LMS that we didn't highlight? All right, so the next topic on here is about the capital plan. Does anybody know where, so the capital planning committee, so Doug and I and Tina had presented, where is that stand?
So
What's the status?
The capital plan committee presented to the planning board and then to the select board. So my understanding was, actually I haven't heard anything more after we presented it to the select board. I know one selectman had said that he was concerned about, the spending that was included in the plan and wanted to really understand it and maybe make some adjustments. So I'm not sure where we stand with that, whether or not it's been approved by the select board. I can reach out to Dr. Queenan and ask if there's anything else expected of us.
Did they end up ranking the various projects?
Didn't have any discussion.
No.
They didn't?
They focused on
I
ARPA
question-
spending for 2023.
I asked that question at our last budget meeting of the
Yeah.
select rep, that the CIP met several times and prioritized as far as opera funds where, they thought money should be spent. That was sent to the select board, who had no discussion about it, just went ahead and spent the ARPA funds.
Yeah, and there was no discussion on any ranking of need or what's going, approving which priorities in which years. There wasn't any discussion on that.
Say the select board had a problem with the amount of money.
Yeah,
That's really not,
I understand.
that's not the purpose of a capital improvement plan.
No.
You're not asking the select board or the town right now for monies. You're simply saying this is what our needs are for our capital improvements.
Yep. Yep.
I'm curious which selectman had a problem with that.
Rich Lascelles.
What was his concern?
He just thought it was a lot to ask of our taxpayers.
But again, you're not asking anything. The taxpayers were just,
Yep. So,
So on the last plan, the Griffin School was sort of the number one project.
yep. The
There is no
committee
ranking at this
declined
point.
to
Okay.
prioritize anything or rank any of the projects.
So they did set to meet in a year, right? Because they wanted
Yeah,
to see.
they want to reevaluate every year, stop, go back in and see where we are and make adjustments to the plan. But
Kind of see where, and they also wanted to kind of see how the land purchase warrant
right,
went to, like, see how it all factors, because they didn't want to rank the school if the land didn't come through.
yeah,
So they were looking to see the land purchase, how that went through, as well as the ask for the town, for the police station, for the architecture fees, to see if that passed as well. They considered both of them kind of like dipping your toes in the water to kind of see the input of the town, to kind of get the votes on that, and then to reconvene after March to get going on the plan. So that's the committee itself.
Well, I think we should keep it on our agenda because obviously it runs parallel to our facility needs, so we need to
Right.
know what's happening on that side of it, so.
Right.
Thank you for the update. Member input, does anybody have anything else to contribute? I know we haven't met as a group in a while. We backed off the kind of routine things because at this point, the projects have been slowed down, and so nobody's been knocking on my door saying, we're not meeting enough. So we'll go with it, I guess.
no, it's good to be back in the loop. As someone who was not in the weekly meetings with North Branch, it's good to be back on the loop, and I'm excited again about the GMS project, and setting forth a plan of how we get there from here on out.
Jen, I was talking to somebody the other day, and said, I feel like in the fall, we need like a ribbon cutting. We need a celebration at the middle school of what we did. After all the Connex boxes are gone and, you know, it's buttoned up, the solar's operating,
No
et
more
cetera.
trailers, no more.
Yeah. But just, so, I really appreciate that your students are gonna recognize the workers, because you're right, they're just, I mean, they become fixtures as you walk in.
I was
you
saying, I'm
notice
gonna
them.
miss running into the North Branch guys at the Dunkin' Donuts and Roundstone every morning. It's me and the two, we all pull in at the same time.
You see the
Pull us
blue, the
together.
blue helmets going through and the bright jackets, and we, you know, Dylan, our supervisor or of the North Branch guys, he's like 6'5", and he's a presence that's going to be missed
Can't-
to see
yeah,
walking
can't
through the
miss
hall.
him.
You cannot miss him.
But I do think planning something for kind of really celebrating it and doing a ribbon cutting sort of thing, because
Having a normal year next year,
Yeah.
we're not going to know what to do with ourselves. We will, but
You just curse yourself.
Yeah.
anything else for member input?
Just, Doug, you just said that the town was gonna wait for, see how they're funding for architectural work. They don't
So
have a
no-
warrant, they don't have a warrant for that.
Yeah, I thought that was, I can't remember if that was 23 or 24, but that was one of the, I think it was for 24, they were going to put on the warrant.
Yeah, they don't have anything this year.
Money.
Have anything this
for-
year? Oh, I thought they were gonna have something this year.
Yeah, I
And then
thought
the
so.
question was, do you stagger the police and the school start as well? But I thought both were gonna be on the warrant. I guess that's a change from either my understanding or
Yeah. no,
maybe I was understanding wrong.
Well, I know when the listing first came out as far as ranking, that was the big discussion. It was, okay, the school's number one, the police station's number two, and they want to make certain it was not done the same year.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah. And I did receive feedback from the planning board. One of the planning board members said, you know, we kind of had this plan, you know, that this was gonna be the year for the school the bond, the school bond, and then the police station would follow. By putting things off for a year, it kind of, you know, everything is necessarily pushed back. So she recommended that we, you know, try to stick to the plan as it is, as much as possible, because other things are waiting on the new school. As it was the top priority before this year. Coming into this year, I should say.
Anything else?
I'm going to just mention it because I think it's important to think about our ADA access and our access to LMS. One of the things that we've been taking a look at a lot is if you take a look at where our parking lot comes in and our handicap spots, and then they enter a ramp that doesn't even close to meet the 1 foot per 1 inch rise from the parking lot up to the bus loop. And then our entrance for a wheelchair or a person with a disability to be able to access, they have to go down to either end because the cutout isn't safe for them to get up and across. It's too steep. So we kind of have been problem solving and talking about how do we broach that to make sure that, you know, we have kids who break an ankle or are on crutches or need a wheelchair for a temporary purpose or a permanent purpose. Getting into our building is a challenge for them, and we want to make sure that our building is accessible to everyone. So we've been talking a little bit about that.
It led to a whole conversation. If you stand on the road in front of LMS and you think about being in a wheelchair and what it would take to get in,
It's impossible.
it's crazy. I mean, the handicap parking spots are down a story, and the ramp is questionable just in terms of how steep it is to come up. And then even when you arrive at the roadside, you then have to access the cut, right? The handicap accessible
back.
cut. And then it's all uphill. Even with the new canopy, you're pushing uphill to get there. It's really, it was not designed to be friendly to somebody in a wheelchair. So there's a whole, you know, what we realized is we started solving one little problem for a little bit, and it just dominoed to the point where we're like, you know, we know that we're going to have to do the underground piping, and I think reconfigure some of the grades and parking lots out there, because it's just, it's bad. As opposed to you go to Campbell Nice flat site.
Yeah.
Pretty, makes sense even at Griffin, you know.
Sprawling Ranch.
It's a sprawling ranch, but it's flat, but not LMS. There's some elevations there that are tricky.
We barely have a curb too. I mean, it's rounded. It's a rounded, crumbling curb. You can go wheelchair right over that thing.
Well, and the problem is, you know, I just described getting in. Imagine being in a wheelchair and trying to get back to your car. I mean, you gotta have some pretty good,
Shoot it.
you gotta have some good brakes on that thing.
It's not just someone in a wheelchair, it's just anyone with a disability or just,
Yeah.
Yeah.
you know, an injury. And then once you get up to the front entrance, you gotta climb that 8-foot, curbing.
Yeah.
That's not a safe. We've had people that have fallen off of that curb or on that ice going across or down the ramp to the parking lot even this year. So I'm not saying
That's
now.
like highway level curb.
The whole property
Griffin,
is settling.
Griffin for sure, but at some point that's
Yeah.
going to have to be
Well,
something that we.
But it's a
parking
30s
lot and
building. We
drainage
are
is on the
ADA
capital
compliant.
plan, too, for not too far down. The drainage and the redoing the parking lot is on the capital plan.
We did just the conversation about ADA just kind of had us having a conversation.
All right. Good to adjourn?
Oh, yeah, sorry. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Seconded.
Moved and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? 500. Thanks for coming to our meeting today.
Thank you.
Discussion.